pop up about the recording now. So please click OK or continue. And now we'll begin. I'll ask our first panelist, Adine, to please introduce yourself and your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Good morning and also good evening to everyone. My name is Hafiza Nuruddin, and today I will present my research, which is actually under the flagship of our research collaboration between START, IAUM, and also UMS. As part of spaces of extremism, locating where and when to communicate using geospatial and social network analysis, building research capacity for countering violent extremism in Malaysia. So basically, my research looks at and explore a small and fuzzy network of Malaysian Islamist militancy through social network analysis and investigation of domestic and foreign connection from 2012 to 2020. Next slide, please. Okay, first of all, I would like to introduce what is this research is all about. I've been actually researching this topic specifically on network analysis for almost 2 years now. So this study attempts to trace the connection and relationship within the broad network of Malaysian Islamist radical militant groups using an instrument known as social network analysis. We have several software out there that can be utilized to study network analysis, and I am using specifically JP for this research. So using SNA as an instrument, this study found that the network of MIRA, which is an acronym for Malaysian Islamist Radical Militant Groups, demonstrate a somewhat fuzzy and highly connected of militant NSA non-state actors. I do hope that this research will assist future research to trace key important militant not only in Malaysia, because this research specifically looks at Malaysia alone, but also to bring forward more connected individual within the region. Next slide, please. First of all, I would like to introduce what is social network analysis. So network analysis is a process to understand how groups of individuals operate and consequentially how they behave. So this involves a process of collecting systematic data on set of actors, their ties, and involves the use of graph theory, mathematical techniques to visually map the social network. Just a little bit of background. I'm a political scientist by training, but my methodology using a qualitative method to collect this data, I will explain later on. But as for the mathematical technique, this is all synchronized within the instrument itself. So the algorithm, the numbers, and the statistic involves is data generated from the instrument. Okay, network analysis can be defined as finite sets of or set actors, and relation define them, where individuals are reduced to nodes and their relationship to links or lines. It defines any set of actors or nodes that may or may not have relationship or ties. Actors can be people, groups, organization, and relationship can be any type, and each type can be a definite network. So therefore, SNA is a mathematical method for connecting the dots and allows us to map and measure complex, sometimes covered human groups and organization. So like recently, the COVID, the social network analysis has been utilized among researchers to trace the rise of COVID-19. There's lots of recent research on COVID-19 using the network analysis instrument. So network analysis is also includes uncovering the patterning of actors' interaction, interpreting these networks to assist in predicting the behavior and decision making within the network. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is just an example of a past research how network analysis has been used to study terror network. So this is one example of the London bombing from on 7 and 21st July 2005. So one of good thing, strength of network analysis, it enables us to actually identify leaderships, members, connection, and the connection of between these members through the visualization of this data. And through algorithm as well, we might be able to identify which member that possess high central nodes. So in this case, we can see that Mukhtar Said Ibrahim is the most highly connected individual. Next slide, please. This is another example of Jama'ah Islamiyah cell by Stuart Khoshade, 2006. And as we can see from the visualization of the network, Imam Samudra is the most highly connected individual among all of these militant actors. So network analysis is a very useful instrument, especially in particular for studying and investigating illicit activities. Next slide, please. So this is just to recap the development of Malaysian Islamist militancy. As we can see that the phenomena of radical Islamist movement is not very new in Malaysia. We have several groups exist since 1960s and 1980s until 1980s, but this requires a different framework. So we have here like Al-Arqam, Al-Mauna, Crypto, Sabilullah, and some of several groups listed here are associated as past affiliated umbrella party. And from 1990s until 2000, we have also we have three actually here, KMM, Jemaah Islamiyah, and Darul Islam Sabah. My research is specifically focused on the post-ISIS era from 2012 until 2019. So we have several group and cluster here, such as Tanzim, Revolusi Islam, Group Bridget Al-Khalid Al-Walid. And I believe if you are familiar with terrorism in Southeast Asia, this group is quite, has been published out there, but we have less information on what kind of organization of these groups, what are the clusters, and who are the leaders, who are the members, who are the proteges, and so on, and who are the recruiters. So we don't have any idea how the network and the organization cell itself, but this is how the network analysis might assist us on how to identify the kind of leadership and also connection between members among this group through locating several individuals. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're going through, first we're going through some elaboration here on methodology of data collection. So one of the huge hurdles that I've confronted with this research is, of course, with data collection. So this research is actually based on my PhD research. I've collected a massive newspaper data from 2000 until 2019, but for this specific research, I only look at 2012 until 2019. So I compiled it between 2016 until 2020. And some of these data, I've collected it through court case such as MLJ and CLJ, and some of it from Malaysian government resources such as white paper. The Malaysian Ministry of Home Affairs, they publish wanted individual Malaysian known as terrorists. So this is this name that will be published in the network analysis are not new. I mean, this name, they have, their name is elsewhere, according to the Ministry of Home Affairs, Malaysian Royal Police, and the court cases as well. So I would like to bring you for a while on the estimate figure of Malaysian individual charged under terrorism offenses based on my collection. So here, from the open sources, I've collected around 296 individual, and 100 and out of these 296 individual, there are 166 unknown names, meaning to say, based on the newspaper reporting, we cannot identify names, age. Probably there are information on location, but nothing more than that. So we don't know this individual, and there are around 333 individuals with names. However, the statistic from from the ICG office, LCG office, Malaysia, as of May 2018, there are 289 Malaysian listed as a militant. So the comparison here between 289 and 296 is not a lot, but I would like only to focus with 133 names here, because these represent this name can be used to study network analysis, because without name it's very impossible to study the network analysis. But I come across as well with issues such as reliability and validity, especially with names. So this is among particular hurdles that I confronted while researching using open sources. So there are names with they are similar person with nom de guerre or short names, and sometimes there is a misspelling. So such as Muhammad Rafiuddin. He also known as Abu Ain. He also was known as Abu Ain al-Malizi. Muhammad Wandi, he is also known as Abu Hamza al-Fateh. But there's lots of misspelling of names. So when I collected a list of all of these names, I have to do some homework by typing the names, rechecking again and again to ensure that the name referring to the same individual, and so on. And also there are other things such as unknown information, there is no revelation of name, and other resources, location, or related militant groups. So this is among hurdles that I've confronted. And lastly, of course, I do not know the status of a deported individual, means those individuals who have been released from the Malaysian detention center and free from any charges. Next slides, please. Okay. Oops. Okay, all right, okay. So how to ensure validity and reliability of data collection and to minimize error in data collection in order to build a good and reliable network analysis of a militant group. So this is what I do for my research. First, of course, triangulation, cross-check from multiple open sources. I have to do this like multiple times. I've spent hours and hours just to ensure that I did not repeat the same name, the same individual from various sources. And then second, I move to the next stage is I only select nodes that represent individual connection, meaning to say, although I came up with 133 names, I only selected 70 individual. So why 70 individual? It is because they somehow connected with one or more other individual. So for example, if you read about Muhammad Wandi, you will come across two similar names that might be his friend or his confidante and so on, or his wife and so on. So this is how I do with the network analysis. And then, like I said just now, I remove unknown names because it is not possible to identify their nodes or trace their links and connection without names. And then fourth, I also try to identify the relationship type if the information is available, of course. So some of the information is available out there, such as you will know that they are siblings or friends, or they meet to online recruiting and so on. And then another last step is that cross-check similar name, nom de guerre, and to avoid multiplication of similar nodes. So based on this careful assessment, in which I spent quite a significant amount of time, I managed to come up with 70 individual out of 130 individuals. So meaning to say, the remaining from the 70 individual is that this individual represent a somewhat connection. They have connection with one another, and the rest they don't have any connection. So I remove this individual without connection. Next slide, please. Okay, here is an example of table 1 of relational data between group affiliation with individual among Malaysian militants. So this is just a step that I have to do. I have to identify individual and their group affiliation. Some information is not available, some information is available. So this is our selected individual. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the first result before I come up with 70 individual. This is a connection between individual and group. So as you can see, ISIS represent the red logo here, the red logo here, and then we have several groups here with blue logo, such as Jundullah, Gagak Hitam, Al-Kubra Generation, Darul Islam Sabah, and the yellow circle, we have Abu Sayyaf, Jemaah Islamiyah, Katiban Nusantara, Jabatan An-Nusra, Ajnan Al-Sham. So these represent groups. And then we have on the gray circle, this is individual that connected with this group. So bear in mind that this diagram, I did not create this diagram, I ran it. I mean, this diagram is from the simulation of the network analysis itself. The instrument will run the module, it will run the data that you have, and it will produce, and you can, of course, you can design or make it according to your taste and so on. But basically, this is the generalization and the visualization of the network analysis of foreign Islamist movement. Next slide, please. Okay, in table 2, we have the degree of frequency and closeness centrality of among Malaysian militant. So this is another example how the simulation produced the result. So we have a frequency, degree, eccentricity, closeness, centrality, harmonic closeness, centrality, and betweenness, centrality. Just to inform you, in a connected graph, the normalized closeness centralities of a node is the average length of the shortest path between the node and all nodes in other graph. Thus, the more central a node, the closer it is all to all other nodes. And betweenness is a centrality measure of a vertex within a graph. There is also edge betweenness, which is not discussed here. Betweenness centrality quantifies the number of time a node acts as a bridge along the shortest path between two other nodes. So yeah, this is about the simulation itself of the network analysis and the result that we have here. Next slide, please. Okay, this is very important. In table 3, we have example of relational data among Malaysian militant. So meaning to say, this will determine the outcome of your network analysis. So for example, Abdul Azim here, he communicate or he has a relationship with Amirul Hakim. He also has relationship with Haifi. He also has relationship with Hassan. And another second example here, Abdul Halid, he communicate or has relationship with Muhammad Rafiuddin, with Muhammad Nasrullah, Sazrizal Muhammad, and Muhammad Nizam. So this is an example how you build from your raw data, and you will link how these individual communicate or connected with one another. And from this relational data, you can use it for your network analysis. But then again, of course, methodology of data, how you build your data, how you find your data, re-verify your data, and ensure validity of the data is very, very crucial. In order to ensure that your data, your analysis is reliable. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, and here we have connection patterns among Malaysian militant. Based on the previous slide on relational data among militant individual. So from the simulation of the network analysis, we can identify here several individuals that are highly connected with the broad network. So we have here, for example, Muhammad Wandi, Muhammad Fudail, Muhammad Rafiuddin, Lotfi Arifin, Muhammad Zahar, and one Muhammad Akil, one Muhammad Zainal. And some of this cell or group, they are highly disconnected from this central node of Muhammad Wandi, Muhammad Fudail, and Muhammad Rafiuddin. For example, we can see that the network of Dr. Mahmud Ahmad here, he belongs to he is affiliated with Abu Sayyaf group in the southern Philippines, and he's connected with several Malaysian militant such as Amin Bako, Jaknal Adli, Muhammad Najib. So this individual, they're concentrated in the southern of Philippines, and based on the triangulation and cross-check of data, I did not find any evidence that can link Dr. Mahmud Ahmad with any of these Muhammad Wandi, Muhammad Fudail, or even Muhammad Rafiuddin. So again, this could probably one of the weakness of network analysis, especially if you're using fully open sources data. So like me, for this research, I did not use any interview and so on. I only rely on open sources. So this could be as well the limitation of this research. Next slide, please. Okay, just quick recap, because this is supposed to be a combination of a presentation on geospatial analysis of a similar group and also network analysis, but probably my plan is for my future research is actually to expand the geospatial analysis using this similar group. However, this is the limitation of this research. Although I've been trained to use the geospatial instrument, it requires a comprehensive data. Meaning to say, we need to have places of origin of perpetrator, location of radicalization, places of terrorism activities, including successful and unsuccessful terror attack, that location with specific localities. So this requires, I think, a comprehensive data. And so far, the data that I have is not adequate to build a resilient or informative geospatial analysis to understand localities of Malaysian militant. But I think with perhaps with fieldwork or with further interview, this analysis is possible. And of course, one of the main hurdle as well is with the ethical concern when collecting addresses or location of these individuals. Next slide, please. Okay, this is geospatial mapping on terrorism incident in Malaysia from 1970s until 2018. So this map, I've collected it from my team in START during my training in 2018. So the source is, of course, from Global Terrorism Database. So this is terrorism incidents in Malaysia, Philippines, you can see, and also some part of southern Thailand. So even though, as we can see, since 1960s, there has been an existence of Islamist militancy in Malaysia, and then with particular peak from 2012 until 2019, we can see that there is actually less terrorism incident in Malaysia that can be affiliated with any of this group, which is actually the main puzzle of my PhD research. But of course, in my PhD research, I did not touch anything on network analysis or even geospatial. It was just an illustration of my research puzzle, and which led to another a cycle of research. This is why I was curious why despite the existence of Malaysian Islamist militancy, there has been actually quite less attack in Malaysia as compared to other countries in the Muslim world. Next slide, please. So based on my research findings on the social network analysis of Malaysian Islamist militancy, there is an intersection relationship among militant movement in Malaysia with foreign militant Islamist group. So such as some of the cluster, like the cluster network of Dr. Mahmud Ahmad, he is connected with group in Islamist radical group in southern Philippines, some operating in Iraq and in Syria, of course, with Katiba Nusantara, and some connected with Jamaah Islamiyah. There are also small cells operating virtually through social media, such as Telegram, Facebook, and Twitter. So although this group exists as a group, but they are highly fuzzy and also disconnected in the sense that we do not know the structure and so on, and because they only operate online. But we should not underestimate the online radical activities from this group, because this group has been linked to actual militant activities such as the Gagak Hitam. Of course, another most important finding is that some of these individuals were previously KMM, Kumpulan Mujahidin Malaysia, and also Jamaah Islamiyah members that has been previously detained, arrested, and they have been released, and then they rejoin radical activities again in ISIS era. So I do hope that this study will assist us to understand behind the puzzle of radical militant behavior demonstrated by Islamist radical militant movement in Malaysia through their active militant trajectories in foreign countries rather than acting similarly at home. So this is the main puzzle of this research. Next, please. Okay, this is what I intend to do, because of course network analysis is not an easy research, because you have to be careful with your data. You have to be patient as well. So for my next research, I intend to actually explore Malaysian actors in the southern Philippines. So we have 6 individuals here. We have Zulkifli Marwan, Dr. Mahmud Ahmad, Amin Bashar, Jeknal Adli, Jurami Awang, and Muhammad Najib Hussein. But of course, when I plan to touch another territory, meaning to say I have to explore as well their network analysis, and I think this might quite take some time. Next, please. Okay, I think that's all. Sorry, that's all my conclusion. and I appreciate if you, okay, and this is my contact information. Feel free to email me if you want to stay in touch. So that's all from me.
Thank you, Adine, for that very interesting presentation. There is a question for you if you'd like to answer it. So this comes from an audience member, and he's curious about what happened to individuals who were arrested but not charged. If they were released, did they face societal stigma or other negative consequences due to their arrest?
I think this question is actually beyond my territory. It's on the legality and criminalization aspect of terrorism activities in Malaysia, because we have several laws that can be used to detain people under terrorism activities. So, for example, we have AMLAFTA. It is a financial terrorism activities. And they can use this law to detain you and put you behind bar. There is also POTA and SOSMA. So it really depends on which law that, and also we have, of course, we have the penal code as well, that create a framework, a very rigid framework to detain any unusual activities that can be linked with militant activities. So, for example, even though you possess one or two books with flag of ISIS, or you have ISIS flag in your computer, you can still prosecute it under this law. So there has been actually a recent research by my colleague, by my friend as well, on criminalization aspect in law with regards to terrorism activities in Malaysia. Yeah. I can't really hear you, Emmy. Can you please unmute yourself?
Yep, I didn't unmute. Thank you for your presentation, Nadine. We're now going to move to our next presenter, Abdi. So if you would like to introduce yourself and your topic, I will turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Amy, for giving me the chance to present. My name is Abdi. I am assistant professor at the Kuliah of Islamic Revealed Knowledge and Human Sciences, the Department of Political Sciences at the IIUM. My paper is an attempt to try to focus more on the ideological roots of religious violent extremism found in almost all extremist violent religious groups around the world. Although the seminar is mostly focused on the Southeast Asia, I think there are differences shared with other such groups around the world, including also the main, I would consider them as the main violent terrorist group, religious terrorist groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, as there are a lot of similarities between them. And one of the things that has driven me to look at these ideological root causes is that I think as long as we don't address the root causes of those problems, of this threat, actually, we are going to encounter with such groups time after time. The anti-terrorist policies up to now have shown that mostly the focus has been on targeting them directly rather than working on trying to address the very root causes, which to me, I might be wrong, but this is my perception, seems to be this intermingling between the religious teachings, or the way they have been acquired by a number of scholars or religious groups, with realist perspectives of politics and international politics general, which to me they do not fit with each other. And I see here that this is what drives mostly those extreme religious groups into violence and using terrorism and using no means at all to achieve those aims as they have set. And this is what mainly my focus of this paper is to see to what extent can we observe this mixture between the realist principles of politics and the religious teachings, constituting into a doctrine, a religious political doctrine that sets the foundations of the behavior and the attitudes of the religious extremist violent groups around the world. As I already mentioned, I would mostly focus on Al Qaeda and ISIS, but mostly they are inspiring other groups around the world to have the same, almost the same objectives, the same goals, but of course through contextualizing them and localizing them according to their own circumstances. If you can move to the next slide. So the violent extremism, I see this violent religious extremism as a result of interrelation between power and domination hunt, which is mostly found among the as a dominant principle among the realist school of thought and the religious doctrines, which to me they are not easily reconcilable and they are not easily kept within the same doctrine, because you can't really kill innocent people, or you can't really at the same time use whatever the means to achieve your ends, and at the same time, or do inhuman things, at the same time refer to the religious teachings and God, to transcendental principles. And I see this is as a root causes, as the very substance of this doctrine, which is informing violent religious groups today around the world, but mostly probably present as they were in the East. Now they are spread across the world. I'm saying around the world because when the ISIS was set, the appeal was spread around the world, and the response was almost coming from countries who responded to this appeal. And mostly, what drive them was this mixture between these realist principles and the religious teachings. But when I say religious teachings, here I should make it clear that the religious teachings, the way they have been acquired by them or by a number of scholars, because it does not mean that necessarily this is a religious teaching, but the way they have been acquired, scholars who are considered as the main inspirers probably of this. So this intermingling between transcendental principles and realism principles, I consider has corrupted very transcendental principles, corrupted in a way of a very root meaning of corruption, referring to the literal meaning of rompere, which means to distort something. And in my understanding, that this intermingling of this acquisition of uh, realist principles, mixing them with the way how religion has been understood by a number of scholars or number of people, has corrupted the very, very transcendental principles, leading to such actions, leading to even inhuman actions. I think there is no other way of explaining how people enjoy killing others, for example, as after time scenes of cutting the heads of people and so on, and enjoying it and so on. There are informations that probably those people might under the substantial dose of narcotics and so on. But in terms of ideological drivers, I consider that those are the root causes of why those groups have ended up into such level of being so harsh, so violent, choosing no means, as we know that choosing no means to achieve ends is one of the principles within realist school of thought, which shouldn't be actually present, especially among those who refer to transcendental, those who refer to God, and those who refer to religious teachings. But probably this is the way how they acquired, or their way of understanding the religious teachings. So acquisition and internalization of realist objectives into the political doctrines of religious violent groups, to me, are considered as the root of the substance of the based on which then those groups develop and pursue their goals and so on. And this is what is considered a substantial consideration of violent religious extremism. And I'm mostly focusing on Al-Qaeda as two of the groups which inspire other groups in different regions of the world, including, I don't have much information in Southeast Asia, but including also East Asian uh, which are present today. They have a lot in common with, and they are very much inspired by the very teachings of Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Although there is a difference between the two, still I consider that the substance of their political, the substance of the doctrine is this a mixture between realist principles and the religious teachings, the way they have acquired that. Next slide. Okay, so firstly, I'm going to stop at the realist principles to look at them, then to see if they are present, or what extent they are present with the doctrines of those violent religious. There is a number of categorization of the principles of realism that I have tried to summarize them, referring to one of the main scholars of classical realism, Morgenthau, as he categorized them into principle of very human nature. The way the realists see the human nature, which refer to it usually as something which is bad, which is not trustable. And this is very much, we'll see later, this is very much present also into the way how those violent religious groups, they define the others. They define the others who are not like them in a way of distrust and on. Another principle is this centrality of power in defining national interests. Here we should make a difference because those violent religious groups, they are not particularly attached to certain nations. So their interests go beyond a nation state level, but this might be replaced with the interest of the Ummah, as they somehow they consider. Still they differ into what who is constituted within the community. So the centrality of power is very much the principle of realism, and struggle for power, the struggle for dominance is very much present into the goals and objectives of violent group. And actually, it's the struggle for power which and to dominate which drives them to group. Another principle of realism is the priority of national interests compared to other considerations in policy making. So usually interests in terms of material material elements of the national interest, but not necessarily linked to certain nations, since they are not actually identified at the nation state level. Another principle of realism is the undermined position of universal moral principles. Okay, I thought there was a question, or okay, if there is any, or maybe at the end of the presentation. So this is very much in common, as those groups whom I'm referring to, usually they don't really pay attention to universal moral principles on choosing their means, but also even on defining their goals and principles, but especially on choosing their means. We have been often witness uh, of their rudeness and the wideness also of taking whatever it takes, in going whatever it takes in order to achieve the goals according to them. So not paying attention to any of the moral universal principles is one of the fundamental very much present among those groups. And the other principle of realism is the subordination of all other concerns and standards, like economic, moralist, legal, and all others. And actually, what mostly constitutes the goals and objectives of those violent religious extremist groups are political considerations, which seems to be priority over all other considerations, and we seem to drive them into those violent groups. Those are the main principles of realism, which seems to have to constitute one of among the basic content of the very doctrine of those violent groups. If you can move further to the next. So I'm going to see now those political objectives and considerations of a religious violent extremist group, mostly referring to Al-Qaeda and ISIS, comparing them, which seems they have to considerable extent they have much in common, but still they are. But two of them seems to have been very much influenced and very much okay remaining. I'll try to. So Al Qaeda, one of the main political objectives is establishment of caliphate, but in a much long term, while ISIS seems to establish caliphate step having a much more top-down approach rather than Al Qaeda, which seems to work more in a bottom-up approach. There is an anti-American and anti-Western attitude among the two. They share in common, and dominating others, even at the world level, dominating others even at the world there is the same, what is shared, and extend Islamic authority over and Sharia to the new areas, while ISIS looks to spread Islamic authority and Sharia throughout the world. And both of them, they have terrorism as a mean. They have terrorism mean. Those are among the political in both groups, which mostly they share, but they have sort of differences in terms of strategies and the ways they use to achieve them. You can move further, please. So Al Qaeda represents all Muslims, while ISIS is much more rigid, represent only Sunnis. Al Qaeda is much pragmatic, while ISIS seems to be much more dogmatic. Al Qaeda aims to expel Western powers from the Middle East, while ISIS eliminate rulers in Iraq and Levant as a way to establish the objectives when the ISIS founded that. Cooperate with other organizations, while ISIS is much more rigid, does not cooperate with others, and Al Qaeda has strategic considerations, while ISIS relies on purity, as this is one of the ways how to minimize it among those who are much more extremists. We can move further to the next slide. So then the transposition of those realist values into the transcendental and the Din al-Fitra concept, in my understanding, as far as I could have read, what has been usually used as for a considerable time platform, as a place where this mixture has taken place, has contributed a lot to the concept, considering religion as considering the Islamic religion as a natural religion, which has somehow then opened the way for the development of those political actions in a very realist features. Principally, one involved in politics is never safe in embracing realist values, but they have gone far. An obvious flirt between the way how those transcendental principles have been acquired, have been understood. Realist principles constitutes the very doctrine of violent extremist group, in a way of referring that the end justify means, which is very realist in nature, and this has led also to the corruption of transcendental, but corruption to the way of how those principles have been acquired by scholars or by those who follow those teaching, and imposing those or internalizing those principles of realism within the way how transcendental teaching have been understood. It has led to the instrumentalization of the very transcendental in a way of justifying whatever the realist objectives are, materialist objectives are, like access to oil, more territory, domination, and so on. They can easily be justified through the transcendental. And in this way, then the transcendental has been instrumentalized by those violent religious. If you can move to the next slide, please. And violence manifest often. The violence has been also manifested as a result of nervousness, due to having a high political ambitions and inability to fulfill them. In the Freudian terms, the hunt for power would bring them into totalitarian approach, because this Dinul Fitra concept is very much oriented towards totalitarian way of building a system which cannot be questioned, cannot be and provide enough space and so on. And this is what also has pushed them into power and domination, choosing no means to achieve political goals which according to them, this is something natural, as they are somehow based on, according to them, they are based on the and the motivation from the quiet transcendental has developed sense and a complex superiority, very much found among those groups. They are the only one who are right, and they cannot be questioned as long as this is something natural. And usually natural things are meant to be there. They are not changeable, and they just have to be. Or I found this dinner feature concept as a platform where this mixture has taken place, now is inspiring the violent religious groups across the globe, morality or the and in my understanding, this has led to the very rompere, if we refer to very meaning of corruption as distortion of the very meaning of the transcendental because of the way how it has been initially acquired and later how it has been mixed with those ambitions in a very, very realistic principle. Okay, next slide. If there is the next slide. Considering relations from our perspective, usually what drives them is to gain power and to gain others, which is very much the principle of realism, and this has made this has transformed the religious objectives, which should be also transcendental, into making them very material objectives this, of this world, and therefore there is a very much concern of gaining and maintaining power with the others, and this has led to distrust and insecurity dilemma into extremist identity othering and entering into relation with others through the security dilemma perspective. As a top priority, attainment of materialist goods, territory, access to oil, geopolitical and geostrategic dominance, and others came together. Those priorities they have been developed, come up into the agenda of priority of goals and objectives of those organizations due to the considerable place of those realist objectives with religious doctrines. This is what has led to the very unprincipled which matches with the principle of realism, which we already mentioned, not being not considering the universal moral principles in one's actions. And this is all justified, referring also to the uncontested of the concept of dinner which has been developed. For next slide, please. Okay. So Din al-Fitra, as a moderator of the intermingling of these transcendental and realist principles, rigidity and naturalness have produced a and blanco approval of legitimacy for whatever the actions to the will that is. This seems to be the main substance of the place where this mixture between realist principles and the acquired religious have been mixed and produced into extremist violent religious groups. And this has been a path to totalitarian regime has been manifested recently. We all are witness what happened when the ISIS was for a short period of time, what type of political system they have set. It was purely totalitarian. And extreme totalitarian. If we can see totalitarianism in a scale, it was an extreme regime set for some time in limited. Okay, and next slide. Okay, in a conclusion, the current violent extremism, as it appears, is found. Yes, I'm just concluding. Is found on the corrupted version of the transcendental, employing the realist principles. But this is corruption of the way how the transcendental has been acquired, not the corruption of transcendental, because transcendental is the way how they have acquired it. They have acquired the corrupt with realist principles, which has produced, among others, those violent religious groups. Violent extremism and terrorist groups continue to present one of the main security and religious challenges today, and a substantial approach that addresses the content and substance of their religious political doctrine is essential to deal with and to counter violent religious extremism. If the issue is not going to be addressed from the very substantial root cause, then we would end up consistently in need of fighting of the religious group, which sometimes like mushrooms over there and there time. Therefore, there is a need for a comprehensive approach in order to deal with this doctrine and to highlight it and to make it clear this is an intermingling between principles of realism and the way the transcendental teachings required that has produced this political ideology, religious ideology, inspiring terrorists around the globe. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Opti. We do have a question for you, and for those of you who have been asking questions, a couple of the questions I think can be addressed by any or all of the panelists. So I'm sort of saving a couple of questions for the conclusion of the event after all the speakers have presented, because they're more general questions that can be answered by a combination of speakers. So, but we do have a question specifically for you. Do you think that those who wish to establish the caliphate, whatever that means in a particular context, is the wish of only those within organizations such as Al-Qaeda or other extremist groups? Or is it more broad spread?
I think the way this political ambition found among the doctrines of those violent groups differ from the historical considerations of how the caliphate has been for some centuries. Is this an objective of others as well, only the terrorists? I'm not sure about this, but taking into account the extent of the level of theoretical development dealing with the caliphate itself, even those who are not terrorists, for example, and those who are violent groups who think of building such a political system, I think first they need to develop further the theoretical foundations of a political system, the way it should the way it should function, the way the power should be acquired, exercised, divided. Also, therefore, there is a need for a further development of theoretical foundations before having such a which at this level, I think they are not much developed. Referring only to the past might not be sufficient to deal with current challenges and current issues by the world and faced by humanity as well. I hope I answered to.
Thank you. So in the interest of time, we're going to move to our
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Our final presenters. And so I will turn the floor over to you, Yulianto, if you would like to take the floor and start your presentation.
Okay. Good evening. Thanks to moderator and all my respected friends My name is Yulianto from Indonesia. I will present this paper together with my friend, Donny Michael. The radicalization of terrorist prisoners through individual treatment. Background, rampant the rest of radical acts carried out by terrorists, both individuals and groups. If they are not handled seriously, the negative impact will be even wider. Rampant acts of radicalism carried out by terrorists, both individual and groups. In Indonesia, there are many cases of terrorism crimes, such as bombing of place of worship, public place, police stations. In addition, acts of terrorism also attack the police and civilians, where these radical acts have claimed many victims. There was a clash between terrorist case detainees versus the police at the Primop Mako Detention Center, which resulted in casualties. There was a clash between the placement of suspected terrorists who are still undergoing the process of investigation, prosecution, or trial. At terrorist conflicts, some are placed in state detention center rutan, and some have been placed in correctional institution lapas. In 2018, riots occurred in Indonesia, which resulted in the death of the police who were in charge of guarding the terrorists. Detains at the Mobile Brigade Command Headquarters Detention Center, placing terrorist prisons in the super maximum security prison. The incident at the Mako Brimob Detention Center is one of the reasons for determining the policy to place terrorist detainees and prisoners in special prison centers, which are equipped with adequate facilities and infrastructure in anticipating riot. In this prison, prisoners receive with guidance so that they can realize their mistakes and can return to society properly when they have finished serving their sentence. Coaching terrorist convict at super maximum security prison is also known as individual treatment. Next slide. Formulation of the problem. How is the application of individual treatment of terrorists inmates at super maximum security or SMS prison? Research purpose. The study aimed to determine and analyze the application of individual treatment to terrorist inmates. Next slide. Yeah. Scope. The study limits the scope of study to the development program for terrorist prisoners through individual treatment at SMS prisons. Research methods. The study use an empirical judicial approach. Primary data in the study were obtained through in-depth interview with a number of stakeholder actors involved. Meanwhile, secondary data is was obtained through regulation related to the development of terrorist conflicts. This study used an empirical judicial approach. Primary data in the study were obtained through in-depth interview with a number of stakeholders involved. There is conducted in lapas kelas 1 Batu and lapas kelas 2A Pasir Putih, which both prisons are located on Nusa Kambangan Island. This prison is one of the two prisons designated as a super maximum security penitentiary. The prison functions as an individual treatment place for terrorists, convicts, and drug dealers at high risk with endangers the security of society and the state. Theory, rational choice theory from Kuhlman. Key element in this theory, actors and resource in the study related to the development of high-risk prisons. The focus is on human resource and infrastructure. Next slide. Current condition of lapas kelas 1 Batu and lapas kelas 2E Nusa Kambangan. Number one man, one cell. The initial placement of prisons at the SMS prison applies the one man, one cell rule. But when the officer has not changed in the improvement of the behavior pattern of an individual prisons, the prisons can be placed in the maximum security prison, where in the maximum security prison, the placement is already in group. Coaching activities are carried out in the cell room. This is intended so that the prison is more focused on undergoing the coaching period, and this prison has not been given the opportunity to leave the room to do coaching, except when looking for fresh air and counseling. Limitation of interaction between prisoners inmates. The aim is that the prisoner do not know each other and do not even know who is in this SMS prison, because if they know that whoever is in an SMS prison, this can strengthen radicalism, which in the end it is feared that they will not change their religious understanding. Restriction on the interaction of prisoners with officers. This is done so that the prisoners do not know each other with the office. It is fair that they will threaten the safety of the officers, because these terrorist inmates usually have a strong network. Visit restrictions. Terrorist prisons who are placed in SMS prisons have the right to be visited by their nuclear family only, namely children with parents, siblings. Inmates are 23 hours in the cell. To make prisoners are placed in one cell room for 23 hours a day. Monitoring of prisoners using CCTV, even though they are placed in individual cells, they are monitored via CCTV for 24 hours and the CCTV is directly monitored by officers so that all activities of prisons while in the cell room are known to the officer. Those officers are able to record when the prisoners has undergone a change in behavior. Speaker or monitor layer inside the cell or room. To make it easier to provide coaching activities so that inmates can hear, see, and follow the guidance given by officer. In addition, the prisons are also given a number of reading books. Please to get some fresh air. Prisoners have the right to get fresh air or to be exposed to the sun directly for 1 hour a day. A counseling room, a room equipped with a security system which is used to fulfill the rights of prisoners in receiving counseling by officers. Spirited visiting room. The visiting room is spirit. So when prisoners have the right to be visited by their families, these visits are also carried out spiritually and are not made into one room with other prisoners. The number of officers is in accordance with the work guidelines for the special prison for high-risk prisons. In the implementation of coaching activities for terrorist inmates at SMS prison, officers are guided by the work guidelines set by the Minister of Law and Human Rights. However, not all SMS prisons have officers or facilities and infrastructure that are accordance with what has been specified in the working guidelines. Officers use tactical wear. One of the provisions in the work guideline, officers use tactical wear in conducting individual treatment of high-risk prisons. For the next part, I invite Donny Michael to continue his presentation. Please, Mr. Donny.
Thank you, Mr. Yuli. Next slide, please. Thank you, moderator, for the opportunity given to me. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Donny Michael. I like same like Mr. Yulianto. And this time, I want to present to all of us here the result of our research in 2019 related to development of high-risk prisoners and the radicalization. The radicalization is an effort to reduce radical activities and neutralize radicalism for those who are involved in terrorists and their sympathizers and members of society who have been exposed to radical terrorist ideas. The radicalization is prison includes the identification, rehabilitation, re-education, resolution, and monitoring and evaluation stages. The radicalization program is implemented in stages so that the goals and objectives can be achieved effectively. And the radicalization is present has the target of convict of criminal act of terrorism scattered in various prisons in Indonesia. This study found the radicalization of terrorist convict through individual treatment is carried out with personality development that includes religious awareness, national and state awareness, legal awareness, and counseling. Coaching is carried out individually in the prisoner room. The sorting of prisoners is carried out based on an assessment of the level of risk. Next slide, please. Thank you. In the context of the development of terrorism conflicts, it can be seen in this slide that the development of terrorism conflicts is divided into 4 stages. On this occasion, I will explain the first stage where terrorism conflict gets initial training in the correctional facility. In first stage, early stage, development 1 to 1/3 is divided into 2 stages, namely the first, orientation and observation admission. That is, for example, registration, appointment of guardians and social advisor, and introduction to self-environment, observation, society research about data and information, profiling assessment, and classification and placement, and the correctional observed team trial. And the second, development implementation. Number 1, personality development. For example, the national and state awareness development and intellectual attitude and behavior, physical and spirit health, legal awareness, and other personality coaching according to need. And the second, development of independent work skill, work and production training, other independent coaching according to interest and talent. And after the terrorist conflict has undergone coaching in the first stage, and it states that there is an improvement in his behavior by the correctional center, then the terrorism conflicts will be continued in the second stage of coaching, and so on. The guardians for terrorism conflicts will be explained further of the next slide. Please, next slide. Thank you. In this slide, the coaching for terrorist inmates is number 1, environment instruction program. The environmental introduction period is in the program that is carried out the initial stage of development when terrorist conflict enter or the in prison, namely during registration, the period of introduction, observation, and environmental research. This activity is to find out everything about the terrorist prisoner personal data. The objective of the environmental introduction period follow about terrorist prisoner know their rights and obligation in prison, and terrorist conflict are familiar with works unit in carrying out guidance tasks in prison, and terrorist conflict now correctional official and guardians, and to know the background of terrorist conflict. Okay, and profiling program, assessment program, religious awareness development, and national and state awareness, and legal awareness, and then counseling. In this counseling, regarding psychological counseling based on Ministry of Law and Human Rights number M.HH2 PK 01.02.02 of 2017 concerning special prison works guidelines for high-risk prisoners require that counseling be carried out at least every 1 week and one time, and the admin at the request the prison who is considered by the head of correctional institution. Next slide. And closing in this slide, from the result of this study, it can be concluded that the implementation of individual treatment for terrorists is made through a program of religious awareness, national and state awareness, legal awareness, and psychological counseling has been running but not been optimal because there are still several obstacles such as human resources, but quantity, insufficient number of officers, as well as quality officer is this present, and the detention center do not have special expertise in providing guidelines to high-risk prisoners. In addition, this existing facilities and infrastructure that this prison are not accordance with the standard prison and mandate in the degree of Minister of Law Human Rights concerning special prison work guidelines for terrorist category high-risk prison. From this study, next slide, please. From this study, it can also be conveyed that the Indonesian state has tried hard to fight act of terrorism and make effort to deradicalize terrorist conflict, so that it is hoped that the terrorist conflict are able to change their behavior, no longer have radical ideal and pledge allegiance to the Republic of Indonesia, and his finished serving period of sentence can return to society well. Thank you.
Thank you, Yulianto and Donnie, for that interesting presentation. I do have a question specifically regarding for you.
Yes.
So how has the COVID-19 pandemic affected the de-radicalization process in Indonesian prisons? Have there been changes to programming because of COVID?
Yes. Regarding the COVID-19 pandemic, the coaching process for prisoners at SMS prisons is still running as usual, but they are a little disturbed when bringing in external resources as lectures, so they cannot be brought in. However, the prison officer has anticipated this, and the officer swiftly replaces this role.
I'm going to go to, there are some more general questions that I think any of the panelists can answer. So if just jump in, if unmute yourself and answer any of the panelists who would like to answer this. So one first question that is a little bit more general, I think several of the speakers could talk about it, but what services are provided for those who may have been wrongly charged in terrorism-related, extremism-related cases, and then may face discrimination because of that charge, even if they were not found guilty, or if they were arrested and maybe not even formally charged. Do any of the panelists would any of the panelists like to address that question?
I am answer your question. It was reported that Abu Bakar Basir continues to give his instruction from the prison while he was in prison. If it's true, how did it happen? This is just a few, according to my knowledge. Prisons who are in SMS prisons have very limited movements and are always monitored by CCTV and officers.
Does anyone want to address questions about the question about those who may have been wrongly arrested or charged? Okay. So this is specifically for the last presenters. What's your current evaluation about the program, the de-radicalization program that's in prisons? How satisfactory is it? Is there still a lot of progress or work to be done to improve it?
Okay, thank you. I think the terrorism is crime against humanity and civilization and the serious threat to every country. And because terrorism is already international crime to pose danger to security. In development, the existence of terrorists in made present a spared problem for the correctional institution because terrorist conflict have different characteristics from prisoner in general. Terrorists tend not to mingle and do not cooperate with officer and have to potential to spread radicalism to other inmates of even to correctional officer. Therefore, guidance for terrorist conflict must receive special treatment in the sense that the treatment of terrorism conflict cannot be acquainted with the treatment of prisoner with the other cases. I mean, that's it.
Thank you. So the next question is directed more towards Adine and Avdi. Do you think the approaches taken by some of the political parties in Malaysia maybe encourage terrorists to launch attacks in Malaysia? Avdi or Adine? If either of you are speaking, you are still muted.
I think I don't have sufficient information on that. I'm still new in Malaysia, and I would not be able, I think, to provide the information on that.
Thank you. Adine, any comments?
Thank you, Emmy. Sorry, my line is quite awful here because we're having floods. It's flood season in my area, so I'm really sorry about my line. I think the answer is not. It's quite vague because you see that if you look at terrorism incidents in Malaysia, there's only one terrorist attack, the Movida bombing in 2016, and it was launched by ISIS group, and it is not inspired by any political party. But if you look at the emergence of some of Islamist radical movement in the 1960s until 1980s, some of these group belongs to were a splinter of Islamic Party past group. So yes, if you look at the context within the 1960s until 1980s, it is inspired by Islamist opposition groups.
May I
I hope
just
I answered the question just now.
Thanks. Avdi, you have
Amy? Yeah, not related to Malaysia. If I may, just few words about my country, where I come from. There are 400 people in a population of less than 2 million. They joined ISIS. And one of the main reasons why they joined is, I think, the considerable content within the religious discourse in the mosques found within the mosques. I think that because all of those people who went, they came from different backgrounds, but what mostly they shared is a very high degree of religiosity. All of them, they were poor, they were rich, educated, uneducated, and so on, from different backgrounds. And I think one of the reasons what inspired them was the considerable dose of politics within the religious discourse in the mosques, which made them to believe that yes, this is what is in their political concept, and caliphate has been established, and to go there to live and yeah, this is what I wanted to add. But about Malaysia, I have no information on this.
Thank you. So Avdi, the next question is directed, I think, specifically towards you. Could you highlight some key points of emergence of Al-Qaeda and Islamic State?
Key points of that they share in common, or?
Emergence, so I think of how they arose.
I think those the source of their emergence, I still consider to my paper that it's a mixture of those realist political consideration with principles, with the way they have understood those religious teachings is what drive them mostly then to determine their attitude, their behavior, the way they deal with others, the way they deal with non-Muslims, the way they see the world, the way they see the West also, this extremist black and white attitude and position towards the others. I think the sources of this is this mixture, which I consider to a large extent has contributed this concept of din al-fitriya, considering the religion as natural, and since it is natural, then it's something which is nothing that is questionable, and everything should just follow, including even the very but I think there is also a matter of what those scholars who have enabled this mixture have taken into account, because there is also a possibility of approaching religion from perspective of freedom, from perspective of individualism, from perspective of love, and so on. But the way they have acquired it and the way they have mixed those two things, I think it has resulted into those. And if the issue is not going to be addressed at the very those root causes, this mixture, I am afraid that we would continue just seeing and fighting different extremist groups rising there, fighting those there and rising in other places and so on, because the motivation is there as long as this doctrine is there, mixed with those religious political, religious teachings and realist political there as the source of their attitude, their behavior, and their objectives and goals that they want to achieve. If we just deal with consequences, then or seeing our terrorist is there, then just go and fight it. I'm afraid that we would keep fighting. We have to keep fighting all the time. But I think we should focus mostly on this doctrine there. And we have to delegitimize this doctrine that this is not what religion is, and this is the way that probably it can be delegitimized also on the minds and hearts of believers, not such, in my understanding, wrong.
Thank you. This next question is for Yuli and Donnie. In your opinion, what are the key factors leading to success for de-radicalization programs? And you are muted still.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. My answer is the principle of placing these dangerous prisoners in high-risk prison is placement in base of the result of the assessment, so that the level of risk category of prisoner is known, placing the worst of the worst prisoner. Security has supervision and carried out optimally activities and behavior of prison of monitor continues for 24 hours. Access to the public is limited. Visiting service are provided not face-to-face, but using an information technology system. And the placement of the room, one prisoner in place in the room, one man, one cell. To prevent and in certain circumstances may endanger other people and the other officer. Interaction and communication with officer is very limited. I think that's all. And the question. Thank you.
Thank you. This is also a question for Yulianto and Donnie, just fairly straightforward. How many detainees in SMS have you met with? Any?
Thank you for question. I think it's not too easy to find prisoners in the Nusa Kambangan prison, fully equipped and full the guard. And in 2019, I see and I meet 4 prisoners. Thank you.
Thank you. This question is for Abdi, who do you think has benefited the most from the rise of groups such as Al-Qaeda and ISIS?
Can you please repeat the question if I didn't?
Who do you think has benefited the most from the rise of groups such as Al-Qaeda and ISIS?
Who has been mostly what? I didn't get this word.
Benefited.
Affected?
Benefited.
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 I don't see anyone who benefited out of it. I think all are the losers here. Even those who blowed up themselves, who were brainwashed, all those who were the victims of terror or causing political instability, turmoil, anarchy, and so on. I don't think that there is anyone who benefited out of. Everyone is loser to a different degree.
Thank you. This next question is for Donnie and Yulianto. They're recently arrested 200 plus militants and the release, let's see, I'm not quite sure I understand this question. How do the recent arrest of 200 plus militants and the release of Abu Bakr can create any differences in the SMS program?
Sorry. Question 2.
Yes, to Donnie, you and Yulianto, the recent arrest of 200 plus militants and the release of Abu Bakr can create a difference in SMS program. I think that question, and Dr. Sedano, if you want to type in a clarifying question, feel free to do so, is how do the recent arrest of 200 plus militants, or how can the recent arrest of 200 plus militants and the release of Abu Bakr create any differences in the SMS program?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Imran. I don't know exactly about Abu Bakr, but I think the principle in placing this dangerous prisoners in high-risk prison is number 1, placement is based on the result of assessment, and number 2, security and supervision are carried out optimal as that's it, and 24 hours. And coaching high-risk prisoner is not only limited to security, but also guidance that leads to individual treatment of the prisoners. That implementation of the formation program is fully carried out in the cell. The coaching strategy for high-risk prisoner is known as an individual treatment program. The implementation of the guidance program at high-risk prison includes fostering religious awareness and psychological, and fostering cooperation with the other agencies. For coaching program, the most empathize on prisoner in super maximum security prison is fostering national and state awareness so that high-risk prisoners are expected to improve their character so that they become love for unitary state of the Republic of Indonesia. Maybe I think that's it. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Maybe
Miss
maybe
Abu Bakar Basir left the prison because his sentences was over.
Thank you. So this is a question that I think is directed towards Avdi, but I think other people may be able to answer it as well. So anyone can feel free to answer this. In what ways can intelligence or other agencies suppress the influence of terrorist ideology?
thank you for the question. Maybe it's question for me.
I think
Yes,
any of the panelists can answer this one, yes. So feel free to answer, yes.
Thank you for the question. I think I think about ideologies. Maybe Mr. Yuli can help me. Oh, I want to question about I want to answer religious awareness development. The form of the activity is by giving lecture on religion conducted by ustads or Islamic religious leaders, or by listening to audio containing lectures on the understanding of Islam from ustads and who are well known in Indonesia. In addition, religious awareness furthering is also carried out by guardians, pamong, who already understand religious science Islam. There are still a few guardians who carry out religious awareness development for terrorist conflicts because the guns are not equipped or have never received training also how to develop religious awareness. Maybe that's it. Thank you.
Avdi, would you like to address the question?
If I may add, I think what best can help here in the long term. In the long term, I think community of scholars, they can help a lot through providing an appropriate approach of religious teaching, which would delegitimize this extremist, violent those of within and political, also political realist political principles within these religious teachings. In a very long perspective, schools can work a lot, curriculum in the schools, universities as well. But when I say this religious scholars, I mean that I think there is a need to change the paradigms. There is a need to introduce also the values of human rights within the religious teachings. There is a need to introduce values of pluralism within religious teachings, values of individualism within religious teachings, which I believe there is a place there, but due to the context into which probably religion has been taught and is taught actually, those elements have not been into the discourse of religious teachings. And also there is a need for those who preach in the mosques also to be well versed on those issues of pluralism, also of democracy, which is very much important, of freedom, of individualism. And I think since those are the one who have the authority, whose word is important for their followers, I think is a good way of, and I think it's a good way also for them and for everyone, you know, because I think those things have a very important place within religion, but they haven't been taught for different reasons, for different explanations throughout history. And another element which should be added also, since we live in a globalized world, we also added the issue of the context. It matters a lot. For example, I come from a country in South Europe, but consider myself as European. While I am still a Muslim, and it doesn't decrease my religiosity while being a European, for example. And those things, what has consistently disturbed me, that a considerable place has been given to this thesis of clash of civilization, which to me it is not a scientific work, because different civilizations, different religions, different people, they can love each other, not only live together, but they can love each other. And those theses, I think they shouldn't be promoted. I was surprised that the place dedicated even in the mosques to this book on the clash of civilization, translated in a very local languages and promoted and so on. I think those are among the, but first of all, there is a need for a work to be done by religious scholars, to broaden their scope, to change their approach, and to include or to at least open the way for many important elements within religion which are not taught or which have not been taught so far, like pluralism, liberty, freedom, individualism, which all of them, I believe, have place in all the religions, not only in one religion. I think this is the way in the long term, but this should be done in the long term, because in order to prevent people from joining Al Qaeda and ISIS, first we need to delegitimize their doctrine. We should convince people that this is not religion, this is a corrupted version of religion, corrupted in a way of being distorted version of religion for different political reasons and so on, which at the end of the day, everyone, I pity even people from my country. They blowed up themselves. I pity them. They were brainwashed. They were probably the first book they read was the book we took in the mosque. And probably the book we took there was very extreme book, having political doctrines there and so on. And I pity them, and we should try to keep our kids away from those ideologies and our communities, because they can very easily fall into their trap, and very easily can be recruited, taking into account also the social media and the other ways of. But the content of the discourse and the approach needs to be changed in the long term to get rid once and for all of this distorted version.
Thank you. And with that, we have now reached the end of our time slot. So I would like to thank again all of the panelists for their contributions to date, and their research and their interesting comments and being willing to answer questions. And thank you to the audience for being so engaged and asking so many good questions. Thank you very much, and we hope to see you at our next panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.